Welcome to the world of hand planing. Learn to sharpen and use a good hand plane. It'll change your woodworking forever. You'll produce a surface that you could not believe possible, and you cannot touch that with any grit of sandpaper. Not to mention how much sanding learning how to sharpen and use a hand plane will actually eliminate. So this is a number 7. This is a jointer. And there's several different sizes of planes, and this one needs to be in your wish list to be obtained at some point because it does a function that no other plane can. But the big question is always, what brand of plane do I buy? I'm going to suggest WoodRiver, and I'll tell you why. The reason why I know a fair bit about these is because in 2008, I was hired by Woodcraft to help them improve and develop this hand plane line. And I was thrilled that they did just about everything I asked, and they produced what I think is probably the best value in hand planes today. They patterned it after the original Stanley Bedrock. But I'm going to go through and I'm going to point out some features. We'll start with the base itself. So it's made out of something called ductile iron, and it's fully stress relieved. That means that once it's ground flat at the factory, it's not going to change over time. If it happens to drop off your bench and hit a concrete floor, it's not going to break, it's not going to crack. The advantage of ductile iron. The front knob and the rear toad are made out of a tropical hardwood called babinga. It's really tough wood, and they've finished it nicely, so there's no rough edges. You're not going to get a blister as a result. I actually went in several years ago, and I changed the design of that rear tote just to tip it forward a little bit to make it a little more comfortable during use. Now, this is what we call a bedrock style plane. So if you want to close or open that throat, and the reason you would do that has everything to do with controlling tear out when you're dealing with figured wood. Instead of removing everything, you simply access these 3 screws on the back, and you can pull that back or push it forward without disturbing the blade, chip breaker, lever cap. But if we take the lever cap off and have a quick look underneath the blade, we'll show you some of the other features. So this is called the frog, and you notice it's got a very large, well-milled surface, and if you were to take that out, the milling on the bottom of the plane where the 2 meet is extremely precise. Start up at the top. This is your lateral adjustment lever. So as you move that one side to the other, it skews the blade so that you can get the blade to be parallel to the sole for an even thickness shaving. And at the bottom of it, there's a bearing that actually spins. That fits in this long slot of the blade, and the fact that there's a bearing on there just makes it that much smoother of an operation. Step down one and you'll come to what's called the yoke. Now the yoke connects to the adjuster knob, and that is designed to advance the blade for a thicker shaving or retract it for a thinner. The old style were triangular shaped. Ours have more of a bubble on the top so that instead of wearing on that sharp edge on the inside of the chip breaker, it makes contact with the inside or remains tangent to it and makes for a much smoother operation. Nice big milled surface means it lays flat, and the big advantage of this is that blade stays perfectly still, does not vibrate when you're using it, which also is helped by the fact that the blade is 125 thousandths of an inch thick and the chip breaker as well. So you've got quite a bit of steel right there. Now, put this back together and talk a little bit about the functions of a jointer. If you start with a smoother on one end, which is 10 inches in length, and then you go to the opposite end, now you've got a 22-inch plane. And the big advantage is the length of the reference sole. So if you're wanting to flatten your bench or straighten an edge, you can't do it with a small smoother because it will simply ride the hills and valleys. Whereas the big jointer will bring the tops down of all the bumps down to one level. Still requires skill by the user, but much easier to do with the long-bodied plane. Okay, now, what do we do to it? We tell you that we cosmanize these planes. First thing we're going to do is go in and check and make sure that it's flat to within tolerance. Then we want to make sure that those sides are perfectly square, and we square them up better than they come from the factory. When I use this on a shooting board, I want that to be right on. I don't want to have to sit there and play around with the blade to try to get it to the point where I'm now squaring the end of the board. So the fact that they're square, that we square them, and our tolerance is 1.5 thou. So that means when you put that in there, you can't pull out a 1.5 thou shim. Next thing we do is we radius all the way around the bottom of the plane. These come so sharp from the factory that if you're planing and you've got your plane skewed like this so as to read a wider swath to help keep it flat, those things being that sharp will actually have it want to head off in that direction. By radiusing it, it reduces that effect, and it also helps prevent dings occurring. You happen to bump a piece of steel with this, if it's really sharp, it'll leave a nick that will end up leaving a mark in your wood. By taking that radius, it makes it much easier to use. Also easier on the hands. Next thing we do, we take the lever cap and we flatten the underside so that when it sets on the chip breaker, it makes contact all the way across. So for the same reason, we flatten the underside of the chip breaker. That way, when the pressure of the lever cap is applied, it's uniform across the back of the blade and doesn't do anything which would cause the one corner of the blade or the other to dig down into your wood. You certainly don't want that. Both what we do to the chip breaker and the lever cap are one time only. You never have to do anything with it after the fact. Now when it comes to the blade, we apply a Charlesworth ruler trick on the back, polished up to 16,000 grit. We do a secondary and a tertiary on the bevel, up to 16,000 grit, with a light feathering of the outside corner. So that blade will come well sharpened. In fact, that will become your benchmark for what sharp is. And in talking about sharpening, that is a maintenance issue. You're going to have to learn how to sharpen so that you can keep it or bring it back to that state after its use. We make sure that the lever cap is nice and free. Sometimes they're a little sticky when they come, so that'll work well. And we test it. So you're going to get, when you get your plane, there's going to be some shavings in there that have come off of that to ensure that that will work just the same way it would if you had taken it right off of my bench. So make your choice of WoodRiver. I don't think you can possibly go wrong with it, and you try for yourself.